Obviously, as Michael said, I'm here on behalf of the Minister. There's a few little things going on in government at the moment, so even though climate change is very, very important, the immediate, he has a few things which might be resolved in the next couple of days. So I've been asked to come and to address you on this. I'm delighted, actually, to have the opportunity to be here in the Institute and to have the pleasure of launching what I think is a fundamentally important document. The key point that I would see, just before I say a few formal words on it, is that the idea of true sustainability is a concept that applies right throughout the chain, and that's one of the key elements of this report, is that it actually deals with the food sector as a chain and addresses the climate change issue in that context, and that's hugely important, because unlike many other sectors, the food sector particularly is a chain. That even the title of the document talks about farm to fork. That's very often used in relation to food safety. And I see Alan Riley is here keeping an eye on anything I'd say on food safety. But the farm to fork concept is as applicable in the food safety area as it is in the developmental side, as it is in any of the other areas, the broader themes that affect the food sector. It's always a pleasure, obviously, to launch or be associated with something that my former boss taught me a lot about, the bit I do know from Michael when he was secretary, and also to commend the work that Jill has done and Joe, as well as the wider team. There was a wide team of experts and stakeholders involved in this who gave freely of their time, and it takes a lot to produce a work like this. It's so well presented that it often belies the detailed analysis and work that's behind it. Most of you here, all of you here, will be aware of that. So when you see a well-presented report and an accessible report like this with many innovative features, it belies the huge amount that has gone into it. So it's building on the work, firstly of the Institute in relation to climate change, but also the wider analysis and stakeholder buy-in that went to that. So I'm delighted to be involved in it. Before saying a few things about the sustainability of Irish food, I think it's very, very important to give some perspective on the extent to which the combination of primary agriculture, fisheries and food, together with forestry, actually contribute to Ireland's economy. It was touched on earlier, but it's no harm every so often to state a few facts. It employs 180,000 people. In 2008, the agri-food sector alone accounted for 10% of Ireland's exports. 10%. Meat exports were worth 2.3 billion alone. Dairy, 2.1 billion. The forestry output was 1.9 billion. So given the enormous social and economic contribution to the well-being of the economy, we must bear this in mind at all times, that any measure that affects Ireland's agri-food sector will have a significant consequential impact on the overall economy of the country. So, I mean, that sets the scene that Brendan and indeed Michael talked about. Agriculture in Ireland has received some poor press in relation to greenhouse gases. But when you compare the historic sectoral emissions from the economy, we find that the bad press is totally unjustified. In 1990, emissions from Ireland's agriculture sector amounted to 19.9 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent. By 2007, this amount had been reduced by 6.5% to 18.6 million tonnes. And that reduction was achieved despite a marginal increase in livestock activity in the period. The most recent EPA projections indicate that emissions from the sector will be reduced further to an average 18.2 million tonnes per annum for the Kyoto period, 2008 to 12. A reduction of 8.5% compared to 1990. So a significant contributor to an economy, hugely important, but at the same time a sector or a subsector of the economy that is actually already showing delivery in relation to climate change. In order to establish the potential contribution of the sector to national commitments on emissions, the Department conducted an in-depth analysis of the potential abatement options currently available. Our findings were broadly in line with the outcome of a marginal abatement costs curve analysis conducted by McKinsey on behalf of Sustainable Energy Ireland. And the findings of the analyses were in line with others conducted and carried out by the UNFCCC. McKinsey's examined the costs associated with a wide range of levers that might deliver greenhouse gas emissions, including a cost curve analysis on potential emission reductions in Ireland's agriculture sector. In our department, we only make decisions, believe it or not, based on evidence. So I very much welcome, and there's a couple of people here who will bear that one out. I very much welcome the analysis of the Institute, which more or less confirms our initial estimates that the potential of cost-effective emissions abatement technology to deliver further emission reductions in agriculture is limited to no more than about 4% of emissions. Now, Ireland is somewhat unique in that the greenhouse gas emissions associated with our agriculture sector as a proportion of our overall national emissions is significantly higher than the EU average of 9%. In Ireland, the agriculture sector accounts for 26.8% of total emissions in 2007, 26.8%. This clearly demonstrates the contrast between Ireland and most other developed countries, where a higher proportion of economic wealth is generated from heavy industry and less from agriculture. In an international context, New Zealand is the only other developed country with a proportion of its emissions that is higher than Ireland. Due to the high proportion of greenhouse gas emissions associated with our agriculture sector compared to other member states, our current post-Kyoto target to reduce emissions by 20% compared to 2005 will disproportionately affect Irish agriculture. And that disproportionate effect is compounded by the acknowledged lack of cost-effective abatement technologies available to the sector. Now, I want to take the opportunity to say that the vast majority of Irish farmers understand their environment and have a genuine concern for it. They know that all farming is a matter of inputs and outputs, and they know that if they are not managed properly, their production systems will be neither sustainable nor profitable. I firmly believe, and it's based on evidence again, that increasing efficiencies in Ireland's beef and milk production system is the key to improving the overall sustainability of the sector. Improved efficiency will deliver a double dividend in terms of profit for farmers and a reduction in emissions. In my many years in the service of the department, if they've taught me anything, it's that about affecting behavioural change in agriculture. It's this: nothing drives policy implementation faster and more readily than increased profits to the farmer. And thanks to the efforts of our colleagues in Teagasc, the essential link between emissions reductions and improved farm profits is now firmly established. The strong uptake in new technologies and practices at farm level provides another example of the correlation between improved efficiency and reduced emissions. Technological advances in dairy production have led to significant reductions in the ratio of methane per kilo of milk produced. In fact, between 1990 and 2006, the amount of methane produced per kilo of milk dropped by 12%, over 12% in fact. The report that we're launching here today reinforces the uptake of sustainable technology as a means of reducing greenhouse gas, advocating the adoption of best practices, including, among others, extending the grazing season, which has always been an objective, increasing the use of low-emission slurry application technology, the benefits of increasing clover in grass swards, and reducing the age of slaughter of cattle. Teagasc have indicated that through the promotion of technologies such as these on dairy farms, it's feasible to further reduce greenhouse gas emissions per litre of milk produced. Experience has shown us that reducing the age of slaughter of beef cattle will also deliver significant reductions in emissions. In 1990, 44% of male cattle in Ireland were over 30 months of age at the time of slaughter. 44%. By 2006, this is reduced to 15%. Now, there were other factors involved in that. The whole BSE debate focused on older animals, and there was a move to make animals younger. But, I mean, there's an efficiency issue there as well. The uptake of new technology and practices has inspired a significant improvement in efficiencies, and this improvement will be built on through research and development. Under our own department's Research Stimulus Fund, for example, there's been a significant commitment of $15.5 million to climate change research projects since 2005. This includes research into new technologies. And we're hopeful that a new area of research, matching nitrogen, for example, nitrogen usage to soil type, will lead to a lower nitrogen usage, which in turn reduces emissions. Now, we all recognise that climate change is the most pressing challenge facing mankind. Inextricably linked to finding the solutions to climate change is the imperative of providing access to affordable, sustainably produced food for all the world's inhabitants. The UN predicts that global population will increase from 6.7 billion today to 9.3 billion by 2050. However, the number of chronically undernourished people on the planet now stands at over 1 billion, or 1 person in every 6. The UN also estimates that by 2050, an increase of 70% in current food output will be required to eliminate hunger and meet the food needs of a burgeoning population. They're stark statistics. Now, due in the main to our pastoral, grass-based production system, Irish beef and dairy production is already amongst the most efficient in the world in terms of the ratio of greenhouse gas to the unit of food. Nevertheless, as a substantial producer and exporter of high-quality, sustainably produced food, I believe that Ireland must exploit our natural advantage and expertise in food production in order to assist in meeting the long-term increased global demand for food. In considering Ireland's agriculture contribution to climate change, we need to widen the discussion to adaptation, how the sector can respond to climatic changes. While the impact of climate change could possibly have some benefits to Irish agriculture systems in terms of a longer growing season, we have to continue to try and understand all the impacts. We must be able to deal with the negative impacts in order to ensure that we can contribute to the growing demand for food worldwide. We must understand the benefits so we can adapt our systems to avail of the opportunities for farmers as food demand increases, as it will. Of course, the need for adaptation is worldwide. Many projections indicate that food production could decline due to the impacts of climate change in some important food-producing countries. It's vital that all countries commit resources to adaptation to ensure that their agriculture systems are capable of meeting the growing demand for food. The conclusion of an international agreement with all parties taking on commitments is the best way to ensure that sustainably produced food from Ireland and other efficient producers is not replaced by food produced from farming systems where much higher emissions are present than their Irish counterparts, and possible ecosystem damage are associated with that replacement. I would like to recognise the progress that has been made in relation to agriculture in the negotiation process so far, and welcome the interdepartmental and the interagency cooperation and support in this regard. Our policies for the post-Kyoto period will be to pursue 2 complementary objectives. At home, we will, through increased production efficiencies and adoption of the very best available technologies, maximise the sustainability of Irish food production, and we will reduce emissions associated with sustainable food production to a minimum. In the international arena, we will endeavour to ensure that climate change considerations do not inadvertently hinder or prove a barrier to the expansion of Ireland's agriculture and food production capacity in the future. I'd like to conclude at this point by thanking Jill and her staff for organising this event. I understand, and we were chatting about it earlier, that this is her term as Director General is ending, and it was a very successful one. Probably took her away from the real job, as she explained to me earlier. So we'd like to wish her every success in the new, going back to the day job, as it were. I know that her replacement in this role will be taken by Dahi O'Cally, a former ambassador, and somebody who also, as we will see, knows full well the international challenges facing the Irish agriculture and food sector, because it was only, I think, last year that Donoghue Kelly was, when he was ambassador in the UN in Geneva on WTO, he soldiered the long nights and days when we were closeted in a hot room in Geneva trying to look at WTO and the wider perspective. So I think he will also add to this, the work of the Institute. So let me conclude, therefore, formally by launching the report. It's an excellent report. It's a hugely collaborative piece of work. I think it will contribute to what is going to be a complex debate. Even when it comes from the international to the national, it's going to be a complex area. But this kind of work, and normally the kind of work done by the Institute, is a huge and a positive contributor to that thought process. So let me formally launch the report and congratulate the writers.